Welcome back, true crime fans.
From Irian to Florence, kindly like and subscribe for the next episode. The air at USP Marion on the 22nd of October 1983 was heavy and electric. It had been building for months. Whispers on the tier, coded notes passed under doors, guards, muttering about tension in the cell blocks. Marion, Illinois, had replaced Alcatraz as the crown jewel of federal security. It was supposed to be escape-proof, riot-proof, murder-proof. Instead, it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The spark's name was Thomas Silverstein. Officially, he was an inmate serving a long sentence for armed robbery. Unofficially, he was a ranking figure in the Aryan Brotherhood, a gang waging bloody turf wars behind bars. For months he had clashed with Correctional Officer Merle Klutz, a veteran guard known for strict discipline. In the language of prison politics, they were on a collision course. On that autumn morning, Klutz approached Silverstein's cell to escort him to a meeting. It was routine, almost boring. But nothing in Marion was routine anymore. Another inmate signaled. A hidden weapon flashed. In seconds, the corridor erupted into chaos. Klutz went down under a flurry of blows, stabbed repeatedly with a makeshift shank. Blood spread across the polished concrete like a dark mirror. The sound of alarms echoed off the walls. Guards slammed gates. Radios crackled. Inmates shouted from their cells, some cheering, some silent. Within minutes, the body of a federal officer lay cooling on the cell block floor. For the Bureau of Prisons, it was the nightmare they had never prepared for. A guard murdered inside their most secure institution for the inmates. It was a signal that even in Marion, power could shift. For Silverstein, it was the act that would define the rest of his life. Warden Ralph Areola declared an immediate lockdown. Steel doors slammed, showers stopped, meals were delivered to cells. Marion, once touted as a modern correctional miracle, turned overnight into a prototype of something new. A control unit prison. Inmates were now confined 23 hours a day. Programs were canceled. Contact visits disappeared. Outside the walls, Washington took notice. Reports of the murder hit the evening news. Headlines screamed, "Guards slain at federal prison." Congress demanded answers. How had the Bureau lost control of its flagship facility? Inside the Bureau's headquarters, a quiet, urgent conversation began. If Marion could not hold men like Silverstein safely, where could they be held? In the months that followed, a handful of administrators, architects, and security experts were summoned to a series of closed-door meetings. Their task was unprecedented: design a facility that could contain the most dangerous inmates in the federal system, gang leaders, terrorists, escape artists, without putting staff at risk. "We're not building a prison," one official reportedly said. "We're building a solution." But the solution came at a cost. Inmates already locked down at Marion began to deteriorate. Lawsuits were filed. Psychologists warned about sensory deprivation. Guards whispered that they were guarding men, not ghosts. Yet the blueprint moved forward, fed by fear and political pressure. By 1986, the Bureau had a draft design, a remote site in the high desert of Colorado, cut off from cities ringed with razor wire and armed patrols. Every cell would be a self-contained unit: shower, desk, toilet, bed, so inmates never needed to leave. Recreation would happen in individual cages, meals would be passed through slots, human contact would be reduced to almost nothing. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, it was a monument to control. The architects called it the Administrative Maximum Facility. The press would later dub it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. To the men it would hold, it was simply ADX. But back in 1983, on the bloodstained floor of USP Marion, no one could yet imagine what that blueprint would become. The Bureau was still in crisis mode, trying to keep staff alive and inmates contained. And deep in solitary, Thomas Silverstein, the man who had lit the fuse, sat in a cell within a cell, unaware that his name was already being written into the foundation of a prison not yet built. Winter closed in on Marion. Strange things began to happen. Plans were rushed. Budgets ballooned. And a whisper moved through the tiers. They're going to build a place to bury us alive. What no one knew then was that the murder of Merle Klutz was only the beginning, that another killing was still to come, one that would turn a desperate idea into a permanent reality and change American prisons forever. The blood on the floor of USP Marion had hardly dried before another killing ripped away any illusion that the crisis was over. Less than 24 hours after Officer Merle Klutz was stabbed to death, another correctional officer, Robert Hoffman, was ambushed and killed in a similar way. Two federal officers murdered inside the same supposedly impenetrable prison in back-to-back days. For Washington, it was no longer a security lapse. It was an existential threat to the entire federal system. Marion went into total lockdown. Inmates were confined 23 hours a day, then 24. Movement between units stopped. Programs, jobs, classes, even the law library, gone. Guards patrolled with heavier gear, radios crackling constantly. Psychologists called it a prison turned into a pressure cooker. Inmates called it the tomb. Inside the Bureau of Prisons, a small crisis team huddled in windowless rooms trying to invent a future. Their files were filled with names of men like Silverstein, gang leaders, terrorists, contract killers. Men who had turned any regular cell block into a battlefield. The conclusion was stark. The existing model couldn't hold them suddenly. Consultants were brought in under non-disclosure agreements. Architects from firms that had designed embassies and missile silos were handed prison blueprints and told to start over. Think of it as containment, not confinement. One memo read, "The design brief called for a facility with 0 blind spots, 0 group movement, 0 chance for an ambush. Each cell would be its own micro-prison showers inside, mirrors through a slot, recreation alone in a cage under skylights, corridors built with angles that gave officers full sight lines. Every door reinforced, every window too high to see out." The inmates left at Marion felt the shift even before the plans were public. One by one, the small privileges disappeared. The televisions were removed from common areas, exercise was cut back, letters were censored more tightly. A rumor spread. They're going to build a place to bury us alive. Some men laughed. Some did. In Washington, Congress began quietly funding the project. Publicly, it was called the Administrative Maximum Facility. Internally, it had a simpler nickname, ADX. The chosen site was a desolate stretch of high desert outside Florence, Colorado, far from any major city, where the wind carried only the sound of trains and coyotes bank at Marion. Silverstein was moved into a cell within a cell. 4 inches of poured concrete on every side, a solid steel door with a food slot. He was banned from contact visits, banned from group recreation, banned from even seeing another inmate's face. His case file carried a handwritten note. No human contact. This experiment, a single man entombed inside the most secure wing of the most secure prison, became the prototype for an entire facility. Bureau officials studied his behavior, adjusting their designs accordingly. Where he found ways to communicate, they sealed them off. Where he could see movement, they blocked the view. They were building a prison not just for bodies, but for minds. Meanwhile, lawsuits began to pile up. Civil rights lawyers argued that Marion had crossed a constitution. Psychologists warned about sensory deprivation. Journalists wrote about men pacing in concrete boxes like caged animals. But the political momentum was unstoppable. Every headline about a murdered guard, every report of gang violence, became another brick in the wall of public opinion. By 1990, the plans were final. ADX would be a fortress in the Rockies with 490 single cells, each a 10 by 12-foot concrete pod. Showers would be incel, meals would be incel, recreation would be in small outdoor cages no bigger than dog runs. Staff would move behind secure corridors and electronic doors. Interaction would be reduced to commands shouted through steel, and yet as the blueprints were signed, a quiet unease settled over some of the planners. They had built the ultimate control unit, but at what cost? One retired warden later admitted, "We built a place where a man can disappear without dying. I'm not sure we knew what that meant." Inside Marion, the inmates whispered about Florence like it was a ghost town waiting for them. Some joked that it was better than a coffin. Others muttered that it was worse. Silverstein, reading legal papers in his cell, wrote a letter to a supporter. "They're designing my future. A box inside a box in the middle of nowhere. They think it will stop me from existing. We'll see. As winter closed in on Illinois, the work in Colorado accelerated. Concrete was poured, steel welded, cameras mounted. The Alcatraz of the Rockies was taking shape, and back at Marion, a guard walking the tier paused outside Silverstein's cell and listened. From inside came the soft, steady sound of a man tapping on the wall. A signal, a habit, or maybe a warning of what the Bureau was about to unleash on itself. On a cold morning in the spring of 1994, a convoy of white transport vans wound its way into the high desert of Colorado. Beyond a final checkpoint rose a stark complex of concrete and steel, its walls blending into the pale earth. This was no ordinary prison. This was the administrative maxillity, ADX Florence, the culmination of a decade of fear, violence, and design born from the blood on Marion's cell block floor. The first inmates were offloaded under a silence broken only by the wind. There were no television cameras, no speeches. Each man was led through multiple sally ports, strip-searched, photographed, and locked into a cell designed to be his entire world. 10 feet by 12 concrete everything. A window slit so narrow the sky looked like a painted stripe. The shower inside the cell. Meals through a slot. Recreation alone. In a cage under skylights, among them, was Thomas Silverstein, the man whose act had set the blueprint in motion. For more than a decade, he had lived under no human contact inside Marion. Now he stepped, still shackled, into cell of security. A prison built for him as much as for anyone. For the Bureau of Prisons, ADX was a triumph. Administrators boasted of perfect sightlines, unbreakable doors, and a system that eliminated the risk of staff assaults. Politicians touted it as proof the government could control its most dangerous offenders. Alcatraz of the Rock, the papers call it, escape-proof, riot-proof, murder-proof. Inside, the reality was stranger. The design that had promised total control also created a new kind of limbo. Inmates described hallucinations, panic attacks, the sense of being buried alive. Guards, too, felt the weight. Some swore they could hear tapping from sealed cells. Psychologists warned of long-term damage, not just to prisoners but to staff, exposed to endless silence and isolation. Outside, the lawsuits multiplied. Civil rights lawyers used Silverstein's conditions as Exhibit A in challenges to long-term solitary confinement. International human rights groups cited ADX in reports to the UN. Former wardens began to speak candidly about costs no one could measure. "We solved one problem," one said, "by creating another." Silverstein himself became a ghostly figure. He sketched the outlines of his cell in meticulous drawings sent to lawyers. He wrote letters describing a brain that feels like it's vibrating. Journalists called him America's most isolated prisoner. His name appeared in footnotes of court briefs, academic studies, and policy debates, a man both vilified and held up as evidence of a broken system. In 2019, before any court could force a change, Silverstein collapsed in a Colorado hospital after heart surgery. He died still technically under no human contact. A man who had outlasted the old Marion, but not the box built in its shadow. His death reignited the debate over ADX, solitary confinement, and what a society owes even its worst offenders. Yet ADX Florence remained. New inmates arrived. Cartel leaders, terrorists, spies. Range 13 stayed locked down. Cell 118 was reassigned a number, but no nameplate. Officers called it the ghost cell. Some nights the wind rattled the razor wire and the pipes groaned. Inmates whispered about hearing faint tapping through the walls. The blueprint born of violence had become a permanent fixture. It had solved one problem and created another. A prison that could hold men forever, but could not decide what holding them forever meant. Whether you see Thomas Silverstein as a monster who killed a guard, or a victim of state cruelty, his story and the birth of ADX Florence force a question few want to answer. How far is too far? And if you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.